front row, I'm going to yell. Welcome and welcome to this opening for the Love of Vermont, an exhibition that features the art from the Lyman Norton collection, presented as one part of two in conjunction with the Southern Vermont Arts Center, our partners up in Manchester, Vermont. Each show has a unique selection of artwork and has over 225 pieces of artwork that highlight Vermont's unique character, people, traditions, and landscapes from the 1920s to the 1960s. More than 65 artists are represented in this collection, and we hope you enjoy it. Before we start and I do the introductions, I want to do some thank yous. Thank you, of course, to Lyman Norton for sharing this collection with both the museum and the people of Vermont. Ann Corso and Allison from Southern Vermont Arts Center, who were instrumental in bringing this exhibition to life. Craig Waller, Danelle, and the entire Vermont Country Store team, thank you very much to them. And I may be biased, but most importantly, the staff at the Bennington Museum. Jamie Franklin for doing such an extraordinary job in curating this exhibition. Jamie, please stand up in the air. Alice for putting this event together and for being nimble and adjusting as we go. All the staff and volunteers at the Bennington Museum, as well as the Board of Trustees. And since Lyman's here, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the staff of our Visitor Service Department and our store. Shout outs to Jason and Anne Marie, who are manning the store downstairs, where you can buy the book, not a catalog, of this exhibition downstairs. So thank you very much. And I've got the second one. So, without further ado, let me introduce the two people up here with me. Lyman Norton has spent his life building the Vermont Country Store, collecting the art of Vermont, and is an active and robust supporter of Vermont not-for-profits, and has spent more time on his bicycle exploring the roads of Vermont than most people spend driving. Raised in Weston, Lyman is a seventh-generation Vermonter and the second-generation proprietor of the Vermont Country Store. His love for the art of Vermont has spanned over 4 decades and continues to this day. And he's assembled this amazing collection of works of art that were created between 1920 and 1960 over the last decades. We really thank him for sharing the Lyman Norton collection that is one of the largest private collections of art depicting Vermont's landscape, its people, and its way of life. Thank you, Lyman. And Anita Raphael, who is a resident of beautiful Wardsboro, Vermont, and is an author that has been featured in a number of publications, ranging from newspapers, magazines, and books from a wide range of topics. Wait, skip a page. That run the gamut from art history, travel, and Epicurean delights. We are fortunate to have worked with such a talented individual who has served as the conduit between the collection, Lyman's vision, and the two institutions that came together to bring this project to fruition. Her work on the book, not a catalog, and contributing mightily to the text has proven to be invaluable, and we thank her for that.
Thank you.
So, with that, we'll start. When did you get started collecting art of Vermont, and why did you start collecting the art of Vermont?
Well, I got started because I was going to get married, so I bought a house in Weston, and then I got married, and we moved in, and I had to get down to my parents' house several times, haul stuff out of the attic because we realized we didn't have any furniture. And so we borrowed and begged and got things like that. Do I have to, is this better?
Yes.
And the, in that era, many of us of my generation grew up with homes with antiques and so on, and we liked antiques. So we started going to auctions to buy furniture, which was cheaper to buy old ones than to buy new ones at that time. So in buying at auctions, and then I was also looking always for things for the Vermont Country Store because we kept pushing the walls back in the stores and that sort of thing. And as that went on, I started to run into my old pal Barbara Malhado, who had an antique shop and a little art shop up in Londonderry at the time, and later moved to Dorset. And we were old pals, and so we started going to more and more auctions together. And sit there and say, you know, there's this painting, and she'd tell me what the painting was. I didn't know anything about it. So didn't take long before the idea hatched of, we should keep these paintings here. They're great Vermont paintings, and they're about to fly the coop. We assumed that there weren't many Vermonters buying them, so they would be going somewhere else. So we got into the game, and she was a great help to me. And the best part was going to the auctions, because it was a blast. And you're there, it's a country auction, somebody dies, the estate, you know, is settled, they put up a tent in the backyard or the front yard, and we were off to the races.
Do you remember the first painting that you bought? Did you actively said, this is it, this is the one that I want to bring into the house?
Well, the first painting that I bought wasn't at an auction, but I bought it from a traveling salesman who lived in East Wallingford, but you know, back then salesmen came and called on you and so forth, and we got to be friends, and I found out he was an artist. He said, I'm right on the way to Rutland, stop in. So I did, and he had a painting in there that was of Beaver Meadows, which is a swampy area between Weston and Route 7, way up on top, and that I had visited because my poor mother, had a Land Rover, and I, as a teenager, started using the Land Rover. We'd go whacking around up in there. So I knew the area. I say my poor mother because the Land Rover was made of aluminum and it dented easily, so there was a lot of evidence about that. Anyway, so that was the first painting, and then the auctions, of course, started. I don't remember the second painting or the fifth or the 10th, but that continued on.
So the way that art is collected has changed throughout the years, you know, through technology, through online auctions. With that change in technology, with that change in people discovering the art that you're interested in, or you becoming more educated, how has that changed the way that you collect today?
Well, you know, the internet screwed up the whole world of antiques and art and everything else in one way, because the small dealers and everything, it didn't, and I miss the days when it was, you know, you'd sit there at an auction, or you'd hang onto the post the tent post or something like that. But on the other hand, in terms of searching things, it's made it a lot easier. I guess prices have probably gone up because of that, because otherwise the old world of arbitrage, where you see a painting and you think, oh, I know what that's, but nobody else knows the value of it. They're gone. Everybody knows the value of everything these days.
Thank you. This question is for Anita. Anita, tell us a little bit about the group of artists that are exhibited in these galleries and how they started exhibiting their art.
Sorry about the grabbing. That is such an interesting question, because most of you, if you have followed the art market or the art world at all, know that there were colonies. There was Rock Park, Gloucester, up in Cape Ann. There was Silvermine in Connecticut. There were just these little pockets of artists, but somehow or other, all that publicity about artists in these little colonies floated over Vermont. It's almost, we know about the White Mountain painters. We certainly know about the group in New Rochelle, New York, and in other places, Woodstock, of course. But Vermont was sort of like not on the art map until around 1904, when a small group of painters in Dorset began exhibiting in each other's barns and studios, I guess. And that just sort of grew. And then more artists heard about living in Vermont, what it was like, it was affordable. There was already a few artists here, and more artists came up, and more artists came to live in Vermont. So then, by the 1920s, they started to formalize their shows a little bit by coming into Manchester, setting up their art outdoors, putting a stick behind it so it could prop it up, and people would walk by and buy these paintings. And And then they started exhibiting at the Equinox Hotel, and then it took off. And the main reason it took off was because a New York art critic for the New York Times, Edward Alden Jewell, started writing about them. He used to make these little tours around New England every summer to the colonies and write about what was happening in the colonies. And he discovered this group in Manchester, and he wrote about the Manchester show year after year after year. Right through the World War era, they were still exhibiting. And so I looked at some of the records for the exhibitions, and say around 1936, 1938, there were 400 pictures being hung for each exhibition that was up for a couple of weeks, with over 100 artists or 150 artists represented. And it is a huge amount of paintings. Just do the math. Multiply it out for how many years? Year after year, they had these fabulous exhibitions. Then they moved to Burton Academy. The exhibitions got even bigger when they used the big gymnasium up there. And then eventually in the 1950s, they bought Yester House, the old Webster Mansion in Manchester, and the exhibitions got even bigger. So do the math. How many paintings is that? So as I started studying these paintings, I was like, well, what the heck happened to all this art? Like, where did it all go? And then I met Lyman.
So as I mentioned, Lyman's been a strong advocate for working with not-for-profits, including the Bennington Museum and Southern Vermont Art Center. But Lyman, how did you get the idea to put this exhibition together? What was the spark?
Well, you don't know yet because you haven't turned 79 yet. And that's why I think that maybe it's time if I showed this while he can still see it. So I approached Bennington and Southern Vermont Art Center, and sounds good to me, and you guys just got to work together and figure this out, and that happened. So, and I want to especially thank Danelle Barnum, our curator at the for the collection, who did enormous amounts of work trying to. We already had it organized and computerized and so on, but then you've watched what she's done, and so everything from getting it packed up and signs and so forth, and down here, and here we are. This is the launch. A week from today is, of course, the one in Southern Vermont Art Center.
Thank you. So you've talked oftentimes at meetings when we were planning the show to really expand the audience, to make it accessible, to make the exhibit something that maybe really widens the reach of our audience. Can you talk some more about that?
Oh yeah, I can talk more about that. As a businessman, I look at nonprofits for what they are. They're nonprofits, and we support a lot, but also you try to lend some experience as to how a different approach might help. So when it comes to art and art shows, there's a huge audience out there that hasn't ever been to an art show, that hasn't ever been to a gallery. You know, a lot of us, I mean, the first time I walked into a gallery in Soho and the woman behind the desk didn't even look up, I was kind of like, whoa, what am I into here? People, you know, it's kind of nerve-wracking. You don't know much about anything like that. So my belief is there's a lot of people out there who are ripe for coming to Bennington Museum, Southern Vermont Art Center, but we've got to change the way that we're doing it, or I should say enhance the way, to be even more customer-centric than we are. We're art-centric, but being customer-centric, making the places more comfortable. I am a big proponent of, in every room, every gallery, if you can put some chairs in there so you can sit down, because there's the proverbial bench, right? I guess if you're studying for your master's in art college and so on, you're supposed to sit there. I tried it, I sat there, nothing happens, but I sit there. And so So I hear some applause. You get tired, you want to sit down, you want to have a chat, maybe you want to have a cup of coffee with one another. And that sort of thing can make a big difference as to how long people stay. And I know from experience, the longer I can keep them in the country store, the more they buy. Well, I think the same goes here. The longer you stay in here, then you're going to get more out of it. So that's a mission I've been on, continuing on, and I hope it's helpful to both the Southern Vermont and the Bennington Museum.
And you'll notice in the exhibition there are 2 giant chairs there. And it was my difficult duty to go to the furniture stores and see which one I could take a nap in. It was, so thank you, Lyman.
I hope you enjoyed your nap.
So this is for the both of you. You've co-authored this book about your collection. And why is it different? And I joke, when I say emphasize that it's not a museum catalog, but it's not. What is the difference? And how did this book come together?
Go ahead.
So it's not a catalog, and that's what I had to keep in my head the whole time I was writing. And I have a degree in art history. It says so on the wall. And Lyman's instructions to me were very clear. Write in simple language, write in short paragraphs, and don't do any of that art stuff. And I literally typed it up in big letters and stuck it on the wall in front of my desk, and those were my 3 instructions. So every time I had the urge to write about symbolism, significance, meaning, interpretation, all that stuff, I had to no, you can't go there. So I had to put a voice in my head to not go there. And so the voice I put in my head turned out to be Lyman's father. For years I had been collecting the old Vermont Life magazines, the ones from the beginning. I have the first issue, and I kind of stopped collecting around 1965-ish issues. So I started reading through the old Vermont Life magazines. There weren't a whole heck of a lot of articles about art in there, but every single issue had something or 2 or more articles that corresponded exactly to these paintings. So I put Lyman's father's voice in my head because he was the founder of Vermont Life magazine. He was one of its original editors. Lyman told me he was one of its sneaky writers who used to put all the articles in there written by him but change his name on everyone. So that's why it turned out to not read like an art catalog. It doesn't have all that kind of data about provenance and all those other fancy things. Which is not to say that secretly I haven't been writing that catalog.
Well, she did a hell of a job. Thank you. And she fails to mention, I said, I want people to read it. I don't want it just to be a picture book of, the images. Those are fine. Let's put some of those in there. But let's make it so you can read it. First thing, make columns like they do in, say, the New Yorker magazine or newspapers, because the type that goes all the way across, it's hard to follow. And this is the biggest breakthrough ever. Make the type big enough so you can read it. So, because, I can't read that stuff. I can, a lot of us are of a certain age. So that was great. The designer did a great job. It's easy to read. We used old-fashioned serif font in the thing instead of these modern sans serif things that are, anyway, I don't want to go on a rant about young designers, so I'll turn it back to you.
Lyman's got opinions. And it's been a joy to work with. It's tough, but he makes a good point that, again, it goes back to his idea of making the exhibit accessible, making it easy to understand, making it easy to read. There is a place for art scholarship in any institution, and we're not shying away from that. But for this exhibition, we definitely wanted to try a new approach, and I think we achieved it. So, for both of you, again, What are some of the paintings that you see in this exhibit here, in the exhibit at Bennington? What stories can you tell us about them? Which ones are meaningful to you?
Well, I have several that are, I don't want to call them favorites, but as you said, they're meaningful to me. And why don't I start with one that was done by one of the 3 artists in the exhibit who are still alive today. One of them is Matthew Perry, who's sitting right over there. Matthew, stand up. Now, he's not an old guy, so, and then there's 2 others. A woman, Susan Grimaldi up in Plainfield, Vermont, who one of my former employees at the country store knew and said, she just painted this fabulous painting of the Orton Farm up in Plainfield from, that was built in 1912 and all that. And it's fallen down and coming apart, and so she did a painting of it. And that's going to be up in the, is that here or up in? SVAC, anyway. So Matthew, here's a treasure hunt. Go see if you can find something called Benson's Garage, and it's by Matthew, and it's painted, and it's sticks and scraps of newspaper, and I don't know what else you put in there, Matthew, but it's brilliant. Cardboard wire. But look around, look through that painting, look at it, and see what you see in it. What I see, and this was done in the mid-'80s, is capturing, after the 50s and 60s and 70s, and more people coming up to Vermont and moving to Vermont, and more second homes and so on. He almost just hit the nail on the head of when it went from building up to when it went to really building up. And you'll see when you find that painting, it's in the exhibit. So that's one of my favorites for those personal reasons.
So I have fallen in love with one artist completely in this exhibition. It's not Matthew, though. Close, but not Matthew. And that is the Wallace Weir Fahnestock paintings. Lyman has several in his collection. There's one just on your left as you enter the first gallery. And every time I drive over the hill into Manchester and look up at the clouds on the face of the Taconics and Equinox, I pretend I'm Wallace Weir Fahnestock and that I'm going to paint that. So look for the Fahnestocks here and again when you see us next week over in Manchester. And my other all-time favorite forever and ever will be the Godenschwager, Great Wall of Vermont. You cannot miss it. I love that. If I steal a painting today, well, it's kind of big to put in my purse, but it'll probably be that one.
Thank you very much. Lyman, do you have some closing remarks?
Yeah, I've got another one that's a favorite because it was done by Churchill Ettinger, but not just Churchill Ettinger came up to Weston in 1946 and was a commercial artist. He used the post office to mail his stuff back down to New York and so on, but also did much painting. And he was a sportsman. He was a skier, he was a bird hunter, he was a deer hunter, and all those kinds of things. And he painted a lot of that. And so look for the only one here that has a skier in it. And it's called Ski Stratton. And in the background you see Bromley from Stratton. And the skier has a red jacket. And he's skiing in that style. I think there's probably a lot of you who learned to ski in the 60s and 70s, and you remember that style. It used to be more about style than speed. We tried to go as fast as we could, but it was that knees together, feet together, stretch pants, the whole thing. We thought we were hot. If any of you learned that, you'll recognize that form and that style of skiing, and that's one of the reasons I like it.
So thank you very much. I encourage you all to take home a copy of the book, and this is the opportunity to have it signed by the 2 authors here at this opening, so please visit our bookstore. And I want to thank both Anita and Lyman and the entire team for sharing the work with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.